And if you are just logging on, we'll wait momentarily to get started as folks continue to click into this virtual space. If you're already here this evening, welcome. It is so good to be with you. Welcome. All right, we'll go ahead and get started as folks continue to log in. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia with Politics in Prose. We're live with Yiyun Lee, Garth Greenwell, and Idra Novey discussing Tolstoy Together, 85 Days of War and Peace with Yiyun Lee. You can follow the link in the chat to purchase the book directly from Politics in Prose, and we'd also like to acknowledge and thank our partners at A Public Space. If you have a question this evening, make sure to put that in the Q&A feature found at the bottom of the screen. We'll move to questions in the last portion of the discussion, though we apologize in advance if we run short on time. Additionally, we're glad to offer closed captioning for this discussion via Zoom's auto captioning service. To enable captions, click the CC live transcript icon at the bottom of your screen. Before we begin, we do want to thank all of you out there for joining us this evening. We are grateful to our family of loyal customers who keep our business and our spirits afloat. And it's my pleasure to introduce this revealing book. For the writer Yiyun Lee, whenever life has felt uncertain, War and Peace has been the novel she turns to. In March 2020, as the pandemic tightened its grip, Lee and A Public Space launched #Tolstoy Together, a War and Peace book club on Twitter and Instagram, gathering a community that came to include writers such as Joyce Carol Oates, Garth Greenwell, and Carl Phillips, among others, for 85 days of prompts and conversation. It was an experience shaped not only by the time in which they read, but also the slow, consistent rhythm of the reading, and the extraordinary community that gathered for a moment each day to discuss Tolstoy, history, and the role of art in a time like this. Tolstoy Together captures that moment and offers a guided communal experience for past and new readers, lovers of Russian literature, and all those looking for what Lee identifies as his level-headedness and clear-sightedness, offering a solidity during a time of duress. With us also is Garth Greenwell, the author of Cleanness and What Belongs to You, which won the British Book Award for Debut of the Year, was longlisted for the National Book Award, and was a finalist for 6 other awards. It was a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice and named Best Book of 2016 by more than 50 publications in 9 countries and is being translated into a dozen languages. He is also the co-editor of the story collection Kink alongside R.O. Kwon. And who could forget Idra Novey, the author of the novels Those Who Knew, a finalist for the 2019 Clark Fiction Prize and a New York Times Editor's Choice, and Ways to Disappear, a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize for First Fiction. Her works as a translator include collaborations on The Passion According to G.H. and Lean Against This Late Hour. She teaches fiction in the Creative Writers Program at Princeton University. On behalf of Politics in Prose, please join me in welcoming Yiyun Lee, Garth Greenwell, and Idra Novey. Thank you all so much. We will throw it over to you.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Julia. Hi, Garth. Hi, Idra. Hi. It's so very good to see these lovely faces on screen and to see all the friends coming in to hear us talk today. I think I'm just going to start talking a little bit about this book, and then I'm just going to ask Garth and Idra questions because they have the most interesting minds, and I never get tired of listening to those two. So as Julia introduced, and as many of you have read with us, so at the beginning of the pandemic, I started with A Public Space, Tolstoy Together, and we read War and Peace in 85 days, which is collected in this book. I want to thank everybody at A Public Space for their hard work for this book, especially Bridget, who curated the book into almost like a novel or a book of oral history from a group of readers, sharing thoughts, sharing outlook, sharing everything in time. So I've been thinking about what this book means to me, and it is like a document, but I myself have learned something from this book and from reading with all the readers. And that is, to me, I think the book reminds me how to read savoringly. I stole the word savoringly from our friend Carl Phillips because he tweeted and he said, this is an experience of reading a book savoringly. So I thought that's a fabulous word. So I thought the book teaches me how to read savoringly, imaginatively, and joyfully, and collectively, and miscellaneously. And the more I think about it, the more I think, well, that's exactly the frame of my whole reading. And since then, we have moved from Tolstoy Together to APS Together, which Idra and Garth both so generously and hosted reading. And so I want to start the hour just by asking Idra and Garth, what is your frame of reading when you read by yourself or with a group of people?
Go ahead, Garth, you want to start? I love that you use the word miscellany and miscellaneously as an adverb. I think that I live for miscellany. I love to do everything miscellaneously. I think I feel the most vitality when I'm not being overdetermined about reading. I may be one of the few people who still loves used bookstores most of all, and sort of the, spontaneity of going in and not knowing what you're going to bring out. And I think I also bring that to every book I read, that I think a great book for me is when I start it for one reason and I love it for another. That you come out and you're sort of, what moved you was not the reason you opened it. So, and I think that's true for both of you, which is why I love reading your work, because I'll always begin, your books are, like I had told you, and then I had started reading Kinder Than Solitude this summer because I hadn't read it before. And I was very interested in what you're doing with shifting points of view. And then the longer I read, I was sort of like very much drawn to something that we were talking about today, which is this question of uncommon sense. Mm-hmm. And how the characters have these blind spots with each other. So in Yiyun's novel, Kinder Than Solitude, you see this happening where the characters all sort of don't make that much sense to each other and maybe even to themselves. And so I thought that might be an interesting connection to talk about, because that's something you talk about in your intro for this book, is this question of uncommon sense and how that's something we go to literature for, because, I'm just like a heap of miscellany. I think we all are, I'm just like a grab bag of, languages and things I'm obsessed with, and they're not particularly connected. They don't make that much sense. I don't make that much sense. So, I loved your approach that reading is like in pursuit of uncommon sense that way.
That's very good.
That's so beautiful. That's so much more beautiful than anything I have to say. So I too, I think that, I trained for a long time to be a scholar and eventually gave that up because, in large part, because I realized I would have to spend my life reading things I didn't really want to read. Like, I remember I took a Milton seminar my first semester of my PhD program, and I love Milton. I love reading those poems. And 90% of what we read in the class were like little ephemeral political pamphlets from the 1640s. And I was like, wait, this can't be my life. And one thing that I love about being a writer is that we really can be led by desire and led by pleasure. Mm-hmm. And, I think what we should be reading is sort of whatever we feel is feeding us at a particular moment. And so there's a lot of miscellany for me too. But then I'm also obsessive, and I also do still have that sort of scholarly baggage. And so I love getting caught by something, getting caught by a writer and feeling compelled to read all the way to the bottom, to read absolutely everything. And, that feeling for me, and I think this is what I found as like really a very lonely kid, that the experience of another person and this sense that, you have this weird one-way intimacy that you have with writers that you love. And where I do feel that some of my profoundest relationships have been with writers who died long before I was born. And then I think really one of the primary motivations for me to become a writer is because I think that's how you try to make the intimacy mutual. I mean, I think that's how you try to enter into a conversation, with a writer, with the tradition they channel. So I have a kind of a mixture of sort of browsing. I too love used bookstores. Lyrical Ballads in Saratoga Springs is one of my happy places, and just picking things off the shelf randomly. But then also, I love the feeling of being caught by somebody.
Yes. Yes.
Just to get along with that, I've been reading War and Peace for years now, just by myself. It's exactly what Garth said. That intimacy with someone long gone. But then last year, when I started to read with a group of people, that was quite a different experience. And I can talk about that, but you both also have led APS together. Idra, you read Christina Stead, Little Hotel with the readers, and Garth, you read Henry James, The Turn of Screw. I wonder if you could both share, how it is for you to read with a group of readers, in that slow pacing, every day, a little chunk, sharing thoughts. How do you compare that to your own, say, going to read every single Henry James novel? I mean, 3 times, yes. So just how do you place that, the reading collectively?
The Tolstoy was my first experience of a book club. I've never been part of a book club. And reading has always been, really individual for me. And, I prize it for the experience it gives me of privacy. And otherwise, my only experience of collective reading was like classes, teaching or being a student in a class, which is often a not super satisfactory. Often one feels that the writer is being put on trial in a way that, as a teacher, I've found I hesitate to assign certain books because I just can't bear for them to be subjected to a kind of, automatic skepticism or suspicion. So reading the Tolstoy, I loved it. And I loved the sense that, we weren't, it felt like, there were so many smart people participating, but it felt unlike a graduate seminar, like there was very little pressure to be smart. It was okay to just be like, this is great. This is just a moment that I really love, or wow, today's reading was really boring. And that kind of, getting to have that experience with Carl Phillips and Elliot Holt and Phil Cly and, all of these really brilliant writers and you guys was wonderful. I really loved it. And then I loved, getting to just sort of do that with Henry James. I just be like, isn't this sentence wonderful? Isn't this just the best thing you've ever read? So I loved it.
Yeah, something else I loved about the way it worked was the slow reading. And, I also get extremely obsessive with writers. And I think that, I either I'm reading someone I sort of found on the curb or someone I've read 200 times. It's sort of like one or the other, or for like a prize or some other thing. But I'm saying pleasure wise, it would either be 200 times or because I don't, it looks like it's calling my name. But I think that what was beautiful about this was the reading something in this way that you're only committing to 30 pages. And as you said, you this question of sort of patience with both yourself as a reader and taking a book of these sort of short, they were like meals, they were like word meals, and then you got to sort of feel how other parents sort of how they experienced the meal, how they metabolized it, what they nibbled on, what they're still chewing on the next day. And so I just loved it, sort of checking in with other people, what flavor stayed in their mouth from that same part of the book, which I thought was just reading it in these small discrete sections was really unusual, and as you said, Garth, that's not like a book club because we're, for some people we're reading it the first time. Some people, as Yiyun, are reading it on an annual basis, right? So it's totally different. And Garth, you've been sort of in reading Henry James has accompanied you your whole adult life. So, I think that's beautiful too, that everyone had a very different relationship to that section of the book.
Yes, I know that's just the each reader has a relationship with the book, and I I feel that this is not like the, I mean, I'm sure you both have been to book clubs. When people read your book, they tell you, we hate this.
Yeah.
We love this, but this doesn't make sense. But that's the end of the book. The judgment is done. They made the judgment. They would. I think this is I do also for myself is just the slow pacing every day. We're not going to make a conclusion about Andre or Pierre. We're just going to look at Andre's clothes today or Pierre's big feet. Just that joy of looking at something closely rather than judgmentally or conclusively. That to me is such a precious experience. But yes, I want to, because you both touched upon something else that I thought this book club or this reading, we started last week again, and once again, I had that joy, just the joy of reading, the joy of just finding something. So I hope I'm going to ask both of you. I hope you don't mind, because in your Idra, in your comments about Christina Stead, you quoted Calvino. There's that lovely phrase, the sudden nimble leap. And, when I was reading with you, I just thought, every day I'm reading Tolstoy too, I feel the nimble leap of many minds. And I just want to hear you talk about that. And Garth, and then I'm going to ask you another question too. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm glad that stayed with you, because it's a quote that I love, and I think it's something I look for as in sort of as a bar for my own writing, and also the things that I love to read. And is that sort of nimbleness between phrases, between scenes, between any kind of shift in the emotions of the characters or the way they relate to each other. And I think that that happened in the comments. Like as Garth said, I loved when we were reading Christina Stead, and some people had funny things to say, and some people had profound things to say. And I think what was special about this was that everyone welcomed this range of responses, where you could just make sort of like, a light joke about one sentence, or sort of like, imagine who you would want to run away from if you were at that party at the beginning of War and Peace. Like, who would you lock yourself in the bathroom to get away from? And it could be like as funny as that, or it could be sort of the line that might, change your particles for the rest of your life. And so I love that the conversation allowed for all of that at once. And I think that's the nimble leap of the prose, right? That allows for that.
Yes. Yeah. Then I'm going to put Garth really on the spot. Garth, in the book, there's a comment from you. I think we printed as a whole page. It's on page 27. But on this day, you made a extraordinary comments. I still think about it. So I'm going to read a lot to the readers who haven't got the book. So you quoted from the book, and Tushin went over to the general, putting 3 fingers to his visor in a timid and awkward movement, not as a military man salute, but as a priest bless. And then your comment is my favorite moment in all of part 2. Though I can't say why is this. I mean, obviously Tushin is the best, but this gesture is absolutely heartbreaking to me. And I wish I could explain it to myself. I know it's hard to explain. Can I just make you explain that joy of looking so closely? I mean, Tushin appeared in, there are 600 characters in the novel. Tushin appeared no more than, 5 pages. And yet he stayed with us. And for some reason, I always thought about those 3 fingers.
I mean, no, I can't explain it. I still can't explain why that sort of ripped my heart out. And, one of the joys of reading War and Peace, and it was my first time reading War and Peace. And, when I think about the moments that I can't stop thinking about, they are little moments like that, little gestures. The moment when the soldiers have all gotten into a pond and the water is sloshing out, like these moments that feel to me like just like little fragments of the real stuck in the novel, you know, like little fragments of the real, like something that seems indisputably real, that brings a whole world or a whole character into a kind of existence that you could not question. I mean, even though it's fictive, it's invented, like there is no questioning the reality of this character. There's no questioning the reality of this world that has this physics that functions in this way. And the kind of, I mean, for a novelist, the love that is the quality of that attention. Like to me, you know, a novelist can be very cruel. A novelist can put characters through horrible things or in horrible situations, and Tolstoy does that. But the quality of attention to a character or to a world that can register sort of that kind of detail is this quality that I think of as love that is for me, you know, necessary to both reading and writing. So I don't know, I mean, that moment, no, I still don't know why is that moment so devastating to me? But it is,
you know, we are today we're on day 5 of this new journey, and already there are so many good comments. There was that one moment when the first dance of the book of the novel was described, a dance between 2 gray-haired, you know, a man and woman, both, I mean, now we would say middle age, but 50, in their 50s, 60s, they were considered really old back then. And there was that description of Maya, I cannot say the long middle name, but she danced only with her face. Her body was not moving. It's all her face. And that, you know, that described that kind of, that stayed with me. It's always just that character alive, just a few smiles, like just with some expressions, dance with that. So I want to also share, you know, just a little bit of what we have been doing these few days already. You know, a group of new readers, some of them are rereaders, have read with us last year. And I love when people say the second reading, it's a different book. But then there are first readers. I want to say it was fabulous just to have different readers from different angles. Last reading, you know, the one thing is I feel that I have read this book for so long, I must have remembered every line, which is so very not true. But we have a designer friend who's reading with us, and she paid a lot of attention to the fabrics and the furniture. And it's the first time I realized there was the line she picked up from yesterday's reading. So Boris' mother, who is not rich, so she has a dress, she has a silk dress, but it's re-dyed silk dress. Just one word, re-dyed. So that tells the entire, you know, economic background of this character. And I just thought, how wonderful to have someone to point out that, I mean, re-dyed. I think I'm just not sensitive to fabric. Someone is sensitive to fabric. And I want to just, you know, because I also use Tolstoy War and Peace just to think about writing. So I want to ask you both, you know, when you do your own writing, I did pull a quote from both of you in your interview, sorry. Idra, in the interview, you said something, I find it so touching and interesting. You have to make yourself a little uneasy to get to something new. And Garth published this, I would call it monumental essay in the Harper's last year called Making Meanings.
I agree.
Yes, I think that's just a must read for our generation of readers. And it's arguing against relevance in art. And in the quote I put out is, art exposes us to the universal experience of being a meaning-making animal in a universe where meanings falter. I love that. So I want to hear both of you talk about, you know, perhaps using your reading as a lens about how to write or how you approach writing. So maybe just we're turning frame of reading to frame of writing a little bit.
Well, they're a beautiful pair of quotes, I think, in a way, because I think when you experience unease, it's a sign to me that I might be making some kind of new meaning, because if you don't have any unease, you may just be sort of like, peddling a bunch of platitudes, like if everything's coming to you and you don't have to stop and be like, what do I mean? It may be because you've already sort of said these things before and you feel very comfortable putting them down. And I think when you feel some unease, it's because you're approaching some new kind of meaning making, which is what Garth was captured so eloquently there. And I think it's like, well, meaning making is what we want to do as writers. And I think we figure out what meaning making looks like when you see a writer do it on the page. And so I think there is this epistemological sense of seeing when somebody has made meaning and making it new on the page. And it makes you uneasy, like I think, that's something that I love as a writer. When somebody says something and it feels bold and it feels like a risk, and it's because they found some gesture that has created a new sense of some sort of like intrinsic meaning that we recognize as true, as Garth said. And you feel it's, truth, ring in you, but it feels like a new kind of meaning, even if it is the gesture. And that it is kind of heartbreaking, like those three fingers, because somebody has figured out a way to take a human gesture to convey meaning in a way that we haven't seen before. And so there's something really beautiful about that. So I don't know, that would be my take, on why that's beautiful, because you just see somebody take words and make new meaning out of them in a way that like maybe both moves you in a way that feels a little uneasy because you are recognizing, a new act of meaning making in some way. So I think that unease and making meaning are in some way are kind of, inextricably linked, maybe.
Well, I mean, I co-sign 100% that idea. And I mean, to me, like thinking again about teaching, about communal reading, I mean, I think that a tolerance for unease, a tolerance for discomfort is so important to cultivate as a reader, as a human being. Like a tolerance of things that make your existence feel something other than frictionless. I think that's so important. And I worry a little bit in sort of the responses that I sometimes see from my students, or that I saw on Twitter before I blocked Twitter on all of my devices because I just felt polluted. But this sense of a kind of intolerance of discomfort. I mean, the way that a word like problematic is used not to begin a conversation, but to shut down a conversation. Like not to say, let's talk about this book, but instead to say, there is moral virtue in not reading this book. I just think that's deadly. I think that's sort of deadly for us as human beings. And to me, I mean, I just take it for granted that art is problematic because it is the tool we have for thinking about problematic things, for thinking about things that defeat our other tools for thinking. And so, I mean, to me, when I'm writing, I want to feel uneasy. Or if I feel uneasy, as Idra says, it's one sign that I might not be writing entirely terribly in that moment. And this idea, that for me, that requires the sort of ability to do that, requires a kind of privacy and, feeling like I don't know, like cultivating a sense of self, an aspect of self that is private, a place where I can fail, a place where I can think things that really scare me, is so important. And to me, again, reading has always been the activity that has carved out that space within myself. Like reading has always been the way that I have cultivated inwardness and privacy. And so in that sense, I mean, they do very much feel like, I don't know, almost really continuous activities. They happen in the same place.
Right. I mean, that I just wrote it down, your phrase, that tolerance for discomfort. I think, I don't want to brag, but I do think with Tolstoy Together and APS Together, it's the only, I mean, I'm not on social media, but it's the only time I realized social media has something good about it. It's the readers who, as you said, I think our readers coming in, they're not just shutting each other off, say, you're wrong, I'm right. Everybody's saying, this is how I look at it. So I want to read one of our audience today, one of our readers today, she quoted a sentence from today's reading. I've read War and Peace many years. I missed that sentence. So she said, this is the sentence, Pierre arrived just before dinner and sat awkwardly in the middle of the drawing room, in the first armchair he happened upon, getting in everyone's way. And I just like that, in the first armchair he happened upon, getting in everyone's way. And I just thought, wow, how did I miss that? If I were an armchair and I would be placed there for people not to sit on, but just to be a decoration. I would really be happy to have a Pierre in my life, just taking me a chair as a chair. I just thought, the thoughts, I think this reader quoted, and then I started thinking, and so I just tweeted that thought. I thought I would be really emotional as a chair to be sat on. And then lovely someone else said, and give a history of chairs in Napoleon's era. So before that, chairs are not supposed, like in Versailles, she said chairs were not supposed to be sat on, it's to be looked at. But for starting at that moment, chairs are supposed to be sat on. I just thought, it's just a one moment in a big novel. All of a sudden we learned things. I learned to look at things that I missed in the reading before. So I thought it's one of the, I just want to say it's one of the really lovely community where people really just offer things and say, look, I found this on YouTube. It's the Daniel Cooper, the Russian dancing Daniel Cooper, or someone else, found all these beautiful fabrics from back in the time. So I just thought, the tolerance of discomfort is also, I think we can, maybe I'm not an optimistic person, but I still think we can move away from that kind of intolerant environment to a better community in a way.
Yeah, and I agree with you that Tolstoy Together really felt like that, and it'd be worth thinking about, like, how did you manage to do that? Like, I do think there was a way that sort of, your tweets and APS and the framing of the whole experience really did make it this space of kind of extraordinary generosity, and made sort of all kinds of, like, I loved, Yiyun, in your tweets that APS would send out, where one moment we might sort of be looking in this very sophisticated way at a point of novelistic craft, and in the other moment we're drawing a connection to Winnie the Pooh, and like there's this way that there was just this wonderfully kind of generous frame established. And then I think, reading Tolstoy is also an experience of that kind of generosity. The sort of world of the book, there's a kind of generosity in the creation of the world of the book. So I agree. That was an almost uniquely sustained, untoxic experience of Twitter. Yeah. So I would love to find a way to do more of that so that I could come back to Twitter.
I know. It's
it seems like sort of the best version of spontaneous interaction in like a big group on social media, and even as was saying, I think it was you about when book clubs and you get on there and you're sort of bracing and it's just like, we as a collective find your book problematic, or, you just don't know when you do a virtual book, you just have no idea what people are going to say. And I think that there was a tone that happened that you set with Tolstoy Together, which is that to both read generously, respond generously, not try try to find anyone else problematic, you know, and that, and I do think that like once it's sort of like when you have a party, like who's ever throwing the party creates the vibe and people kind of follow them. So if the person who is running the party and is doing the toast and putting out the food has like a sort of, you know, menacing expression on their face, then I think other people just become slightly menacing on the line for food. Whereas like if the person who is sort of gets the party going, which was you, Yiyun, in this party, you know, that I think there was a way that you came from this place of sort of wanting to delight and being genuinely curious about what other people have to say and how other people read. And I think other people followed your lead in that way.
Oh, that's...
Oh, well, I was just, it was also, you know, it was the very beginning of the pandemic. And I also think that we were all so freaked out, so desperately lonely, you know, locked in our houses. I mean, it was still at that point when, I don't know, I mean, we were in our house, like frantically scrubbing all of our groceries and like leaving our mail for 3 days without opening, and you know, all of these things that we were just terrified out of our minds. And so I think that also may have lent itself to a kind of generosity of spirit. Like I really did feel immensely grateful for the sort of communal experience of reading this book in those first months of the pandemic.
Yeah, I also, so much of like our memory, at least so much of my memory was in reading that book. And I particularly remember one day, Garth, you actually said, I'm catching up with the reading. I'm next to Iowa River and I saw these squirrels, you know, being very dramatic. The animal world was killing each other. And it's so funny because that moment of your commenting on the nature and also other readers and someone, you know, would take a picture of the blue sky of California, sort of, you know, reminding me of Andre's, you know, lofty blue sky. It's sort of, I think other people's memories also have become my memories throughout this reading. And that to me, you know, I'm not Idra, I'd never go to party and I never throw a party. But I do think this is probably the best party I've experienced. Yes.
Yeah, well, now we know you know, if Tolstoy's occasion, or you know, you made for a great party. I think it was something else. Yeah, it was, you know, the memories, as you said, you know, of Garth's, that line has stayed with me as well, and then you associate it with the scene. But I think for a lot of people, for me, the beginning of the pandemic was so bewildering that it was hard to read and keep reading. And so I think something about reading together, and you know, even if you know fell behind or whatever, it was that there was this opportunity to sort of get back to reading and get off reading the updates on, you know, what was happening with the pandemic and, you know, where the hotspots were and you know, all of these alerts that were happening constantly. It was very hard to get off one's phone and just be with the book or be with the squirrels. And I think that this created an occasion for that. Hold on, there's a helicopter, so I'm just gonna.
That's so very, just, you know, it is very true. And I think even just this time, you know, when we were reading last year, I thought, well, the pandemic for sure would be over by the time.
And yet. One other thing, now that the helicopter has passed on my loud street, was that I think something else that helped me get back into reading through APS Together was, you know, you had that wonderful line that a gossip is a great assistant to a novelist.
Oh, yes.
That you said, and that even though there's like an overwhelming number of characters that are introduced in the party that opens this book, only because we were just talking about what a great party you threw for this year, that, you know, I think that I love that line, and it got me returning to other books that open with parties, and I was thinking to myself, I was like, oh, why is a gossip so helpful to a novelist or to a writer? Because they sort of convey the social mores, they convey the social consequences, they convey the ways that people in any era find others problematic, you know? So like there's a way that that's the role that a gossip, you know, can function, and why they would be useful, as you said, to the novelist. And so that semester I was teaching Flannery O'Connor's story, Good Country People. And it begins in the drawing room. And that's one of the stories that I return to endlessly. I could just read that story every day. I just find it so fascinating and learn so much for the way the story actually moves, for the physical space of the house, and sort of drops you away in the barn in this way. Like the way it has an architecture that's both the architecture of the story and also the architecture nature of a property. I think it coincides beautifully. But going back to it with that line that you said about Tolstoy, I saw the role of, Mrs. Freeman with New Eyes, and why that gossipy character was so helpful to creating the social stakes of the story. And I thought how sometimes what happened in APS Together was that these insights on one book brought you back to other books and kept me reading, because I had an insight that I could take from Garth's, Leading Henry James, or from you, and then that got me excited to return to other books and read them more deeply. So I think it was almost just like it got me reading more deeply and away from checking, pandemic updates in a way.
Right. Go ahead, Garth.
Well, I was just going to ask, because I know we're going to start getting questions soon, but I wanted to put you on the spot. And I would, because I am so enamored by and inspired by your practice of devotional reading. And I know years ago you had said that every year you spend 6 months reading War and Peace and 6 months reading Moby Dick. And I wanted to ask you what that kind of devotional practice, one, I'm interested to know how and why you began it. And then if you feel, or if you can articulate, like what the effect of that kind of devotional reading has been on you as a writer.
Right. Well, that's such a good question. I am still doing that. War and Peace half a year. I just finished Moby Dick a few months ago. I think, one is these are two fabulous books. I can reread them, for the rest of my life. I can still learn. But I also think, part of writing or part of reading and writing to me are the same. And it's just to have a structure for life. I think oftentimes we sort of, sometimes we think writing and reading are special activity. You have to have special space or special mental space. But, life never gives us those space, right? One thing after another, as we have seen in the past, as how many years, life never stops. So I think reading especially is very slowly a long book. It's just my sort of, I guess, my willful gesture of making time and space for myself. And I've been reading War and Peace, and I realize it's just every year it's new memories accumulated in my notes in the book or in the post-it in the book. And that structure, it sort of textures my life, my reading life in the past many years. I know there are pages when I read them when I had a very difficult moment in my life too. And I could see that when I was reading it. But I think the good thing about reading devotedly, I really love your words. I just devotional reading. I think in a way there were moments in my life that I could not write, and what I did was I actually hand copied War and Peace onto index cards.
Wow.
Just to, I think really just to get my hands and eyes moving rather than, I think when we are stuck, we're stuck because we're in the middle of a circle of thoughts instead of doing things. So I think War and Peace, it just happens to be my choice. Any great book would be great, right? I just, well, if I cannot write, I'll just write like Tolstoy. That's all I was thinking. Yes. I wonder if I should start to pull questions from the audience. What do you think? Yeah. I think, well, feel free to put questions. What do you think? Some of the questions we're not probably experts. What do you think of the mod translation, especially in comparison with break translation? I have to say, I've been reading Javier Vronsky's translation. I have also been reading Briggs' translation, but I have not read Mott translation. But Mott translation seems to be very popular last year. And this year, we also have a lot of readers reading that. In fact, I think there is a panel coming up in October with well, I think it's with White Whale Bookstore. It's actually, we have two translators who read Russian, and they are going to talk specifically about the translation and War and Peace. So that might be better, that might be helpful.
There's another question down below that was about the inclusion in Pevyarin Vakonsky of the French.
Oh, yes.
And a question about that, as opposed to, because you put up that wonderful quote, I think it was this past week, about when the French was translated into English and how that made for a different reading experience.
Right. Garous, I'm just curious, you read the PV translation, right? Yeah. My thinking is, I think these are all interesting decisions on the translator's part. Tolstoy, when he first wrote The War and Peace, all the dialogues were in French. And even back then, apparently, readers were very upset. Some of the critics were so upset and said, if you are a Russian writer, why do we have to read a Russian novel in French? But I think Tolstoy had his point is, at the beginning, people are speaking French, and the whole culture, even though it's Russian, the whole culture is very Francophone culture, and everything is about French. And halfway through the novel, as the war goes on, the Russians stopped talking in French. In fact, even the Russian, the Russian aristocratic families, they start to hire Russian tutors because they cannot speak Russian. They cannot write in Russian. And I think that transition from French to Russian would be lost in a translation where all the French were translated into English. And so I think PV translation really has kept that nature. And so, but I also understand it's just you have to read twice. I mean, I have to read French and my French is so bad, and I have to read English and then I have to go back to read French again. It just takes a little time. So let's see. First time, okay, let me see. What is the recommended audiobook version of War and Peace? That I also don't know, but I know one of our readers last year said he really liked listening to the audiobook, because all the soldiers talk with a Cockney accent, and all the upper class, all the aristocratic, they have very posh British accent. So I just thought that's an interesting tidbit. I don't have experience with the audiobook. I read War and Peace last year with you. I thought I would do it again this year and read it in French this time. I wonder if anyone else was going to do this and read it in another language. I find from past experience that the variation in the language makes a huge difference in interpretation and understanding a novel. What a wonderful thing, or what a wonderful gift to be able to read in French. In fact, I do think this year we have one reader who's reading in Russian with us. She said last year she read in English. So this year she's reading in Russian. Last year we have some people from Asian countries. One of them reads in Japanese and one I think read in Chinese. And so it's all very good. Whatever language, it's a great book. What was the word Yiyun said Carl Phillips used? It's savoringly. it's savoringly. So that's a okay, this might be a good question for both of you. Isn't all art, like creation itself, a result of friction? Garth, you used friction, and I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think we make things in response to that friction. I mean, I sort of feel like if we felt sort of blissfully at one and at ease all the time in our environment, probably we wouldn't need art. I also don't think anyone feels that. Like, I don't think that's like an option for living beings, but if one could feel that way, I don't think one would need art. And I mean, so yes, I say yes. What do you say, Idra?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I was thinking, like if you're trying to start a fire and you're using friction to light a match, you don't know when it's going to work. And it doesn't work every time. you know, and like back in the day or last week, whatever, or maybe in the future when we all have to just light a fire to function at all on this planet. Well, but I'm just saying, like, you doing with two rocks or however you're trying to get the spark going, you're not guaranteed for it to light. Like, I think that friction, part of what's interesting about friction is that you just don't know exactly when it's going to happen. It's very uncertain. And I think that's why art's hard. So.
I just want to add quickly, speaking of friction, just for War and Peace, how War and Peace got written was, also just something not working, because in fact, he was going to write a novel set in 1825 about the Decemberist revolutionaries. And he realized to write that, he wrote a long time and he couldn't make sense. So he realized he needed backstories. The backstory is 1805. And to 1812. So he went back to write the backstory. It became the novel. So it is, again, something, it didn't spark the first time when he was trying to start that fire.
Yeah.
Move back 10 years. So the next question would be good for both of you to comment on. Thank you for your articulate synthesis regarding the necessity of tolerance for discomfort in reading, writing, and conversation. I wonder how you think about constructing, assimilating this ethos and discomfort as foundational for dialogue and inquiry within the classroom. We all teach, yeah. Idra?
Yiyun, would you take that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and how you've done that in the classroom.
Oh, no, one of you, I have to think. I don't know. Garth, why don't you start? Garth is always good at this.
Oh, well, so I do it one way in workshop that I actually find it easier to do in workshop than in a literature class. And in a workshop, I do it just by structuring workshop in such a way that we spend a really long time before we begin evaluating anything. Like, just the question of do we like or not like something is off the table. And it requires this sort of very structured, disciplined looking at the object in a way that I think can sort of encourage seeing complexity as opposed to leaping to judgment. So that is, I find, pretty helpful in workshop. Reading in a literature course, I find it more difficult. And I think what I strive to do is to make students feel as though they stand in a position of something other than like passively being acted upon by a text. That actually these texts are not things that act upon us, that can merely trigger us or sort of cause us pain or discomfort, but that instead, we are in active conversation with them. We have all sorts of tools we have to engage with them in a way that empower us. We are not just acted upon. And then I guess, I don't know. I'm interested to know what you guys think. I try in all my teaching, I try to foreground questions as opposed to arguments. And to have a sort of atmosphere of inquiry as opposed to an atmosphere in which power is generated by articulating the most devastating critique, which I think I often feel in a classroom setting, whether it's workshop or a literature course, that whoever can be most devastating in critiquing a text sort of gets to put on the crown of the classroom. And that, I think, is just a deadly dynamic. And so instead to sort of say who asks the most probing questions, or who asks the questions that are most difficult for us to answer, and then who asks the questions that are most implicating of everybody, to try to sort of take away righteousness as a position that any of us has warrant to, I guess.
Yeah, I also try to only to both begin with questions and stay with questions, because I think that gives the writer something to keep going with, And so one of the things I like to ask when we're talking about character is like, how is this character a cultural anomaly? Because I think that if nobody can answer that question, then the character hasn't come alive yet. everybody's a cultural anomaly. Otherwise, you're a caricature. And so I think that that has become like a helpful question to just be like, in what way is this character, a cultural anomaly? How do they sort of defy who we expect them to be, or who and if there isn't any answer, then that's helpful to the writer to think and write into going forward. And also I think it can just be, nobody has to say anything devastating, because the way that people move the question forward in itself gives the writer information about what's in the story, and maybe what could be in there potentially in the next version. So
yeah, I agree with both of you just very much. And I have changed my teaching a little this semester, actually using the War and Peace, the Tolstoy Together experience. I ask my students to keep a reading log instead of just doing these very smart critiques about, point of view is not working, translation is really bad, pacing is off. I just ask them to record their reading, which line stays with them, what makes them pause, what makes them think, what makes them want a little more. So I feel that, it's really just as we read War and Peace, there are, as Garth said, there are episodes, chapters we all just thought, oh, this is not quite, I said, someone mentioned yesterday, we have mentioned it before, the short lip and the mustache of little princess. I mean, forever from the beginning, Turgenev just complained about it, said, what's the matter with the little mustache? But as I said, a big tree has a bad leaf. He had a bad writing day that day, or he had a bad writing period, episode with the little princess. So I think so I actually have taken a lot from our Tolstoy Together experience into the classroom. I think we may have time for one last question. And I like this question. So I don't know if we have answered to that. It's so much of reading is based upon certain learned and taught constructs. I'm thinking about the hunt for symbolism of the trope of rising action, etc., etc. When I see at the back of some of the books I read, when I read that thing just disappeared. Some of the books I read that there are guides for good book clubs. It makes me wonder, are there ways to make the kind of reading that you guys did more widely acceptable and accessible to people trained to read and to people who just want to read intelligently? I think, I don't know. I think our book, this book is the beginning of our effort to read intelligently and joyfully and collaboratively and imaginatively. I agree with this reader. We don't have to listen to whatever constructs we have to read that way, which goes back to what Garth and Idra said. You start a book with one reason, but you end up loving it for 1,000 other reasons, right? So I think that's the joy of reading, I would say. I think we're on time. I think it's about time, but thank you, Idra and Garth, for coming to join me. It's such a pleasure to see both of you on screen. And thank you everyone for coming too. And here's the book.
And thank you, Bridget Hughes, and everyone at A Public Space for making this collective reading experience happen. And maybe have more like this, some more reading intelligently and miscellaneously together.
Yes.
And we here at Politics and Prose would like to thank the three of you, Yiyun Li, Garth Greenwell, Idra Novey, for joining us in conversation this evening. And again, to A Public Space and our audience out there for all of these thoughtful questions. Your patronage and dedication enable us to bring you this incredible programming, and we wouldn't be able to do it without the book sales to support it. So go ahead and follow one of the links in the chat to get your copy of Tolstoy Together, 85 Days of War and Peace with Yiyun Li, or you can just visit politics-prose.com. And of course, check out our events calendar for everything else coming up this fall. And from our shelves to yours, we will see you next time. Stay strong, stay safe, stay well read. Thanks to the three of you again, and goodbye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, Julie.